Welcome everyone. My name is Emily Pyle, admissions counselor here at St. Louis University Madrid campus. I have the pleasure of introducing the talk we have today that is part of a series called Viral Thinking. This is being recorded on July 15th, so the information may have changed when you are watching this. In the Viral Thinking series, we will share information across several disciplines and how they've been affected by the corona crisis. It is our hope that the talks spark further conversations that are relevant and thought-provoking. Much like a viral YouTube video, our hope is that the conversations inspired by the videos in this series will catch on and go viral, so to speak. Much like the liberal arts style of education, where students study many disciplines that are ultimately interrelated, so is the coronavirus crisis. While COVID-19 at first look is a biological subject, and we do have a talk on the virus and testing, at the same time, the coronavirus crisis is affecting many areas like the economy, physical and mental health, office and human resource management, world health policies, business models, and so on. In fact, our political science department will be offering an online course this fall about the COVID crisis, and will cover topics such as political communication strategies, how political leaders react to uncertainty, and how political systems manage crisis. Maybe you didn't have the virus or suffer the effects of COVID-19, but you will inevitably be affected in some way, shape, or form. Today, we'll be talking about the effects of COVID-19 on the global economy. This talk will be given by Dr. Pablo Swedberg. Pablo Swedberg holds a PhD in economics and education from Columbia University and is currently a professor of economics at IE Business School and St. Louis University Madrid campus. His research focuses on empirical microeconomics in the areas of labor economics, immigration, and economics of education. Pablo has been working at the OECD Directorate for Education and Skills in Paris most recently. Pablo has been a professor at SLU-Madrid since 2009. Welcome, Professor Swedberg, and thank you again for joining us today.
Thank you. So today we are going to talk a little bit about the impact of the pandemic on the economy. Of course, there's we need to separate between the current impact and the future impact, right? So far it has had an impact already, but it will have like a second impact if there's a second lockdown. And we need to be aware that there's a lot of uncertainty concerning the future economic impact of the lockdown in case there is a second lockdown. The impact on the economy covers many subjects. Of course, it covers inflation, it covers unemployment, it covers the labor market, it covers international migration, international trade. So we will try to cover each topic very briefly. So to give you a short idea of how it affects the different areas.
Perfect. So I think we're going to start off by just discussing how the lockdown, the quarantine that we were in affected specifically inflation, correct?
Yes. Okay, so inflation is, for those who are not fully aware, inflation pretty much measures how prices change over time, okay? And this is important because inflation affects our purchasing power, right? If goods and services become very expensive, we can buy less goods and services with the same amount of money. Okay, so for us, it's important to keep inflation stable and low. Now, inflation pretty much depends on the interaction between supply and demand. So how much is produced and how much is demanded, how much is consumed by the different actors in the economy. Now, because the lockdown has had a negative impact on economic activity, and a lot of people have lost their jobs, a lot of people have lost part of their income, the impact on demand has been negative. Okay, so the idea is that there is less demand, people are buying less goods and services, and therefore prices are not increasing as much, right? And this is something
Mhm.
that you can see on this slide, right? On this slide, we see
Mhm.
over time, this is for the European Union, we see over time how inflation has gone from about 1.3% to close to zero. Okay. Now, it is worth mentioning that prices have changed differently for different goods and services. Okay, so the most negative impact you can see on the slide has been on energy prices. Energy, energy covers mainly oil, right? The COVID-19 crisis has hit transportation very strongly. Therefore, there's a much lower demand for oil, and oil prices have decreased quite substantially. Okay, so that's on the one hand. On the other hand, we have food, right? Food has become more expensive. Food has become more expensive. Now, why? Why? The reason is sort of twofold. On the one hand, there's a higher demand for food, right? People are staying at home, are cooking a lot more, and they're buying a lot more food from supermarkets. That's one of the effects. The other effect is also a shorter supply. In advanced countries, the reason is, I'll talk about that in a few minutes, but the reason is that in advanced countries, most workers in the agricultural sector are temporary workers, right? And these temporary workers move from one country to another. And now, because of the restrictions, they haven't been able to move to other countries. So there's a shortage of labor. And when there's a shortage of labor, there's a shortage of production. And when there's a shortage of production, we have higher prices. Okay, and the same is true in the Euro area, as you can see here. And this slide is for the United States as well.
Right. Interesting. Well, moving on to certainly something that I think everyone has affected, maybe in some way, shape, or form, is unemployment. So what is unemployment looking like right now in Europe, worldwide? Certainly this lockdown has affected that tremendously. What can you tell us about unemployment now?
Yeah, well, unemployment. So there's a few things about unemployment. On this slide, you can see how unemployment has increased in most countries. Now, it's important to mention that governments have intervened very strongly to keep unemployment at its minimum given the circumstances. Okay, so the unemployment rates that we see today are not giving us the real picture of what is happening. Okay, in some countries we have what they call temporary layoffs. Okay, so these temporary layoffs, if the situation improves, these people will go back to work. If the situation gets worse, these temporary layoffs may be converted into permanent layoffs, and therefore the unemployment rate will increase. Then we have in other countries where the government is partially supporting the unemployment. So what happens is that people are partially unemployed. They're working maybe 50% and they're getting paid 100%, but they show up as employed. So that 50% is not recorded yet. So my main conclusion as far as unemployment is that the impact is going to be very strong, but we haven't seen the full impact yet in some countries, right? Especially in countries where government support is very strong, mainly European countries.
Yeah, definitely. Do you think, in your opinion, a country that supports unemployment heavily obviously might suffer more long term? I mean, is there sort of a middle ground when it comes to how much, government intervention regarding unemployment? If there's the best way to do it, or
it's actually a very good question. You see, the previous world economic crisis that we had was in 2008 and 2009, the so-called world financial crisis. And at that time, there was a lot of debate of precisely about government intervention, right? How long and how far should governments go? One distinct feature of this current crisis is that there is very little debate, and that pretty much all economists agree that governments should intervene very strongly, and as long as it's necessary, right? So of course, it's hard to tell, right? It's hard to tell, but I think that at least for 2020, there's a general agreement that we still need to support the unemployed and also the companies in order to allow them to survive, right?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, definitely. It's definitely something new for all of us that we're experiencing right now. Another new thing that I think we've all dealt with is working remotely. So working from home, or possibly reducing the hours that we are working in the office and working from home. Who specifically has been able to work from home in this situation? I think you have a couple of images for us.
Yeah.
Obviously not everyone is able to work from home right now, so.
Of course. So on for the countries that you see here on the slide, on average, about 40% of workers were able to work from home. Now, what's interesting about this is that this is not evenly spread, okay, especially from an income perspective. Okay, so it's not 40% in every single sector, right? In some sectors, most workers are able to work from home, or all workers are able. In some sectors, very few workers or no workers are able to work from home, right? So the impact on remote work has been very unevenly spread. Okay, now from an income perspective, on this slide, we see, you can see here first quartile, fourth quartile. Fourth quartile means the 25% of the households with the highest earnings, and first quartile means the with the lowest earnings. And we see for every single country, Canada, Australia, the US, Great Britain, we see that for every single country, the impact has been very uneven, right? So workers in higher deciles or quartiles of the earnings distribution are more able to work from home and therefore keep both their job and their earnings, right? In the case of low-income people, it's more difficult. They work in occupations where it's more difficult to work remotely. Some of them have been able to keep their job, although exposing themselves to the virus, right? So it's more risky, which is shown also on this slide. And some of them have just lost their jobs because they weren't, I mean, the companies weren't able to continue paying these workers.
Right. Yeah, it's certainly interesting to note that someone who's able to work from home obviously has more flexibility, will likely keep their job and stay healthy, which is,
Correct.
you know, probably the most important thing right now.
Yes.
What about, so we can see, does it vary much by country and type of occupation, working from home?
Well,
what can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, it does. I mean, most of the slides that I'm using, because of the information that is available right now, are for OECD countries. So OECD countries are the most advanced countries. Okay, now this situation in developing countries, unfortunately, I don't have a lot of information available to show, but in developing countries, the situation is very different, right? Because in developing countries, Latin America, most sub-Saharan African countries, some Asian countries, in those countries, remote work is not as prevalent, right? So in those countries, the situation is very different. And basically a lot of, and then and not only this, but also in developing countries, this is also a very important distinct feature. Government support is very, very weak. Okay, so in developing countries, the impact of this pandemic has been much stronger and much more negative for those two reasons. One, the government is much weaker financially speaking, and the second one is that most jobs are not performed remotely. Okay, so you have much more, and we see right now that the situation in terms of health and contagion is much worse in Latin America, for example, than it is in Europe.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. What about sectors? Which sectors have been hit the hardest because of the virus?
Yeah, so another distinct characteristic of the crisis is that the impact has not been evenly spread across industries or sectors, right? The previous crisis that I mentioned earlier, 10 years ago, 12 years ago, was mainly a credit crisis. People did not have money. So when you don't have money, you stop buying pretty much all goods and services, right? Not exactly in the same proportion, but it has an impact on all sectors. This specific crisis has had an impact on some sectors very much stronger than on others, right? This is a slide from the International Labor Organization that shows how different sectors were impacted. This was during the lockdown, so things have changed a bit. But of course, transportation, airlines, hospitality, anything related to tourism, those sectors have been hit the most. And then all the sectors that can be performed remotely or that were never under lockdown. So, for example, the education sector was performed remotely. The health sector has been kept. Anything related to agriculture, food, those sectors have survived the crisis much more easily.
Yeah, and as we mentioned, people are at home, they're using the supermarkets more, they're probably, cooking now more than ever. So utilities, I think supermarkets would fall into that category. They're certainly using that much more than they were before, instead of going out to eat, of course.
Exactly.
Moving on to consumption, what is that looking like right now? Has consumption affected industries differently? What can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. Well, it's pretty much linked to what I just mentioned, right? That consumption has gone down, but as you can see on this slide, in some industries, like for example in hotel, restaurants, the negative impact was quite strong. Okay, so at around minus 30-35%. Then you have other industries like arts and recreation, where the impact is about 25-30% because of the restrictions on audience. Then we have household equipment, about 10%, clothing, footwear, not as much, right? So you see that most industries have been hit negatively, at least all the industries that are shown on this slide, but the impact has been definitely different on different industries.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Kind of going back to government interference, government spending, which is a big one. How have government finances specifically been affected through all of this? Obviously, they're helping out their citizens more with unemployment, so certainly the government is going to be hit hard by this, certainly.
Sure. So as I said, I'm going to focus mainly on advanced countries. The impact of developing countries is a little bit different, but the idea is the following, right? That the idea is a government is like any household. You have revenue and then you have expenditure. Okay? And the idea is that you need to balance revenue and expenditure, because if expenditure exceeds revenue, then you need to borrow money. And borrowing money is both costly and in some cases not feasible. So in this case, the crisis is having a tremendous impact on government finances. Why? Governments are spending a lot more money. Effect number one. Effect number two, their revenue is much lower, right? Because most governments rely on taxation for their revenue, and taxation depends on economic activity, right? So if companies are not making money, they're not paying as much tax. If people are not making money, they're not paying as much tax. Okay, so you have a combination of less revenue, more expenditure. What does that mean? That means that you have a wider deficit. So more deficit means that you need to borrow more money. And as you borrow more money, your debt increases. Okay, and that's pretty much what's happening. This slide is interesting because it compares the impact of the previous crisis, the global financial crisis, 2008, 9, 10, to the current crisis, right? And we see how the deficit, this is an average, a world average, right? So we see how the deficit fell to minus 5% for the previous crisis, and now they expect a deficit of 10% on average, which is quite a lot, right? So twice as much. And that's the right-hand side. Then on the left-hand side, we see the debt. Okay, the increase in debt on average was about 10% in the previous crisis, and it looks like it's going to be around 20%, which is quite a lot. Okay, so I mean, one of the differences between the previous crisis and this crisis is that I believe that this crisis is more intense, but hopefully the recovery is going to be faster, right? Okay. Hopefully the recovery is going to be faster, unless it takes a long time to find both treatments and vaccination.
So what are the solutions looking like? I mean, how will future taxes be affected? Obviously, I'm sure they will increase. What is government spending looking like down the road?
Those are good questions. I mean, the thing is, as I said, there's no one is questioning right now that expenditure needs to be kept high to support workers, to support governments, to support employment. Now the question is, once we go back to the, let's call it, new normal, of course, government expenditure cannot stay as high as it is right now. So on the one hand, government expenditure will have to fall a little bit, and on the other hand, governments will need to increase their revenue. Okay, so how do you increase your revenue? There are two options. One is raising taxes, and the other one is increasing economic activity. Right? If you have more economic activity, you have a broader tax base, and you can tax people more, and then you increase the other one. And and in this case, there is a debate already in some countries whether how quickly governments should start increasing taxes, right? On the one hand, the earlier they start increasing taxes, the argument is they will be able to reduce their deficit. On the other one, the argument is if they increase taxes too quickly, this will hit the economic activity and will not allow for a quick recovery. So that's kind of the idea.
As an economist, would you be able to give your opinion which one is better, or is it kind of impossible to say?
Well, it's difficult, and you know, many opinions in this specific field have some sort of ideological bias, right? So of course, people that are more leaning towards center left, they will tell you one thing, and then people leaning towards center right, they will say less taxation, right? So and it's hard to, and what I can say is that there's no one fits all solution, right? So it depends on on the situation, and it depends on that specific country. And then it also depends on the type of taxes. There are many different types of taxes, right? Company taxes, earnings taxes, sales tax. So each country will require a different solution. That's what I think.
Right, definitely. And something you touched on earlier was migration, so international migration. How has that as a whole been affected by the virus and the pandemic and lockdown?
Yeah. So we don't have a lot of information yet, but the impact on international migration is definitely very, very strong. Okay. This is from the International Organization of Migration, and we see this shows the number of entry restrictions in the world, right? So right now there are many entry restrictions, and they are affecting tourism, as I said previously, but they are also affecting work visas. Okay, and they are also affecting student visas, right? We are a university. We're an international university. We get students from all over the world. This lockdown is having an impact on our university because of that, because of the restrictions. And the same is true for labor, right? So the impact is going to be quite substantial on labor movement and on student movement and on tourism. Okay, the question is how long these restrictions are going to be kept, and no one really knows.
Right. Well, using Spain as an example, I mean, that's a country that depends on tourism. Lots of students come here from around Europe as well as the US, international. What is Spain looking like months from now? It's going to be impacted heavily, no doubt, by a lot of those things.
Yeah. Correct. No, tourism is certainly, tourism is probably the sector that is going to be most negatively hit. And then students, we don't know yet because we're still a month and a half, 2 months from the summer, but there is also going to be an impact. Okay, probably international students within the European Union will be able to move from one country to another. But most of the students from the United States, Asia, from other, in that case, it's going to be much harder.
As we mentioned, this talk is being recorded on July 15th, 2020. So whoever's out there watching this, when you're watching it, the situation could be very different than what it is now. So it's changing daily almost at this rate. Well, thank you again, Dr. Swedberg, for joining us today and giving us this very informative talk. I certainly learned a lot. If you're interested in checking out more of our talks, we have one coming up on the effects of COVID-19 on international relations, which is related to this economics talk as well. And that talk will be given by Dr. Laura Tedesco. Well, once again, thank you so much. And it was a pleasure having you.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.